I'm here with Dr. Paul Baines, who is Reader in Marketing at the Cranfield School of Management. Paul recently co-authored an article looking at the influence of marketing communication channels on voters during the 2010 British general election. Paul, this article very much represents a new way of addressing an old problem. Could you tell us a bit about the problem and in what way your approach was innovative?
Sure. The problem is one of determining the effectiveness of different touch points or marketing communications on particular voters. So the question is, how do we determine the relative effectiveness of, say, a message in relation to a party from TV news versus an election poster versus a party election broadcast versus, for example, word of mouth discussion between two people about a particular party? So that's the problem. And it is an age-old problem. Often enough, in different circumstances, some communication media are more important than others. I think an iconic example was the 1979 Labour is not working poster from the Saatchis for the Conservative Party. More recently, of course, we've had other communication channels which have been more important, such as the Kinnock party election broadcast, which is widely regarded to have ruled him out.
So we've won one.
Exactly,
Yes,
the Sheffield rally.
Yeah.
Things are changing. In the last election, the 2010 election, it was the debates which became centre stage as a potential communication medium, not one that's completely controlled by the parties, like party election broadcasts, where they can design the thing themselves. So in a sense, media's changed, and the problem is, as political parties and media observing those parties, how do we determine which of these media are most effective? So that's the problem. The solution is one of, instead of measuring people's reactions to media by polls, which is the traditional way, age-old way since the 30s and they were first developed, is to use a different method of questioning people and a longitudinal panel. In other words, a large group of people questioned on several occasions over the 4-week period of the election. So a lot of research that's been done in the past is single cross-sectional, just one snapshot. This was over the whole period, Richard.
Right, so it's about getting much more granularity around the influence of particular media events on voters and how that affects their intentions. So understanding what influences voters must be almost like the holy grail of this kind of work. How has this work contributed to that quest?
Well, in a sense, I mean, this particular piece of work was undertaken by myself and a number of colleagues inside Cranfield, but also two agencies. One of those agencies was Research Now, who provided the panel. We also had the support and in both analysis and writing terms from Mesh Planning. So the method is unique in the sense that it's an academic practitioner collaboration in that sense. That's unique. You don't always see lots of that. But I think the other way in which it's unique is that we combined both a longitudinal panel survey and panel study rather, with the collection of data using mobile phones. So people, the average voter, our sample was a group of floating voters, were asked to fill in an online survey at the start of the campaign and complete an online survey at the end of a campaign. They were also asked to text us on a series of questions each time they came into contact with what they regarded as a political message from not necessarily from a political party, but that had a political party in its context, if you like. So they could see a news broadcast which talked about how Labour were doing or talked about Labour policy. Equally, maybe they see a Labour poster or a Conservative poster or a Liberal Democrat poster in the street. So what was unique about this is that instead of just asking people's opinions about what they regarded as the most effective at the end of a campaign and at the start and comparing the two, what we actually did was looked at their experiences throughout the campaign, and we call this approach real-time tracking. So the unique approach to to measuring effectiveness is one that actually doesn't necessarily have to purely be used in political campaigns. That's just the example here. It could be used to evaluate any particular campaign for any product or service.
So the study itself, as you say, revolved around particular touch points where voters come into contact with the brands of the different political parties. Which particular touch points stood out, did you find, during the study?
Well, in this particular case, in this election, 2010, one of the key things that was new was the election debates. They were completely different from debates that had taken place in previous elections. And you had the three leaders all vying the three leaders in three different debates, all vying for the popular vote. And what we picked up from our floating voter panel was that that Nick Clegg did the best as far as the voters, the floating voters, perceiving persuasiveness of this particular approach. So, in other words, floating voters thought that Nick Clegg was the most persuasive of the three leaders. Now, the problem is that whilst that had an impact on their intention to vote for him, what was interesting was that never actually came through in the final vote. Now, our study doesn't necessarily illustrate why that happened, but the likelihood is that the Liberal Democrat vote, which has always been weaker, less loyal than the Conservative and Labour vote, didn't appear because either they stayed at home, finally decided that they wouldn't vote for Liberal Democrats, or they changed their vote to what they'd voted for in the past, which wasn't Liberal Democrat.
You've already talked about some of the benefits to the wider marketing world. Could you say a little bit more about how that could be picked up?
Well, I mean, the point about this method, real-time tracking, is that it allows you to plan integrated communication campaigns, because it helps you look across the different communication media. Equally, also helps you to understand how to run a multi-channel campaign. So as well as understanding how to integrate it, what's working and what's not, what would work better with what method, you can also get some understanding of which groups of customers are using different communication channels, or experience channels, if you like, as we prefer to call them. So I think it's potentially revolutionary, is this method, because it allows you to track the effectiveness of the communication experience in real time, and that's not online and offline, by the way, and that's not really happening at the moment.
Okay. And next steps for research in this area, what do you see those as?
Well, I mean, we've asked a series of questions of the panel. So with this particular data set, we have a whole bunch of data on mood, on positions, how people perceived the positions of attributes, image attributes of political parties, both before and after. So we could look at dynamic positioning, the nature of how the voters' perceptions of parties changed over time, and which communication media most directly led to those changes in positioning. We could also look at extending this study into looking at a much wider range of communication media, because we took 6. And of course, we could use this approach elsewhere in other election contests. So there's a variety of ways in which we could do it. Another approach is also, of course, to look outside the area of politics and to see whether this same method works well in say, services markets as well as consumer goods markets. So I think, which I think it will, but it may well have, it will have different nuances in each of these different contexts.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. A great innovation with a lot of promise by the look of it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Richard. Thank you very much.